Well, it's winning.
Welcome to the Sports Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Marcus Luer, and I'm thrilled to have another rock star of the sports industry, all the way from Philadelphia, Mr. Scott O'Neill.
I had another one where I had jumped in and volunteered to work on the WNBA, and at the time there was this kind of boy band named Insync, and they had just come onto the scene and were the hottest band in the world, and I had known their manager and done some work with him in my past life, and had connected with him to do a launch of the Insync's album at WNBA games. At the time, they were trying to attract teenage girls.
Mm-hmm.
This boy band was kind of the teenage girl magnet.
Yeah.
So I figured that was a great marriage, and they launched it there. They gave videos, they autographed stuff, they gave away merchandising. It was almost like a can't fail project, and yet it failed.
All right.
And I was about 6 months into my tenure at the NBA, and at this point I was really frustrated. And this great HR head, his name was Jeff Robinson, called me at his office just to check in. He's like, "How's it going?" I'm like, "This is the worst."
And what went wrong?
Like, what's the worst? He's like, "This place, it's awful." He's like, "Is it the place or is it you?" And I said, "It's not me, of course. How could anything be my fault?" And again, another great lesson when you're young. Oftentimes you spend a little more time looking in the mirror, and a lot less time looking at everybody else when things go south. But nonetheless, I was at that point in my career, and I said, "Are you kidding me?" And I rattled off, I had done this and I had done that, and so-and-so didn't do this and so-and-so didn't do that. I'm going through, and he said, "What role did you play in the failure?" And I said, "Well, but I don't know." And he ended up asking me a series of questions about, my relationships and how connected I was at the NBA. And it was really an interesting question. And he said, "Well, this is a matrix. And to get things done effectively in this organization, you need to have relationships. You need to spend time creating them. And you only been here for 6 months, which is effectively 6 seconds." And so, and I said, "Well, I'm on the road." And he said, "How often are you on the road?" I said, 5 or 6 days a week. And he said, "Well, does that make sense?" I said, "Well, that's where I add value." And he said, "Well, there's a difference between being right and being effective. And right now you may be right, but you're not effective."
Mm.
And I said, "Well, how am I supposed to do that?" And he said, "Scott, you seem like a smart guy. I bet you could figure it out." And so, I ended up coming off the road at first 1 day a week and eventually 2 days a week. And so I spent 1 day in New York and 1 day in our entertainment offices in New Jersey. And that, I of course would do my paperwork and busy work, but I spent time connecting with people and getting to know them and meeting them when I didn't have to ask for something, and creating a window of opportunity so that when things came up, I was the one that they would call if they needed something related to the teams. China is where we're spending quite a bit of time. The basketball market in China is off the charts. At least if you believe the facts and figures, which I have experienced, you've got 300 million people playing basketball in China. 300 million people. We had a preseason game there last year. They said 55 million people watched the preseason game. We're considered a top 5 team in China by kind of Weibo engagement and followers, and a top 7 hockey team for the Devils. And so we have 3 full-time native Chinese employees here, 2 in content and 1 in sponsorship. Yeah, they're incredibly talented young folks. And while my mandarin stops at ni hao, this younger generation of global citizens seem to all speak multiple languages and can effectively and efficiently walk across multiple channels. And so I'm there. I go along for the ride. We did go through a 3-year period where we had the worst win-loss percentage in the history of the NBA over a 3-year period. So we went through a pretty lean time on the basketball court. The good news was that we were committed to a long-term strategy. And so just like we do today with all of our decisions in business, and like we do today with all of our decisions on the ice and on the court in front of the screen, if it's Dignitas, is that we want to make the best decisions for the franchise, which aren't, obviously they aren't always the right decisions. We make plenty of mistakes, but we always have a long-term view. We want to be, we are very well aware, you mentioned it earlier, of the impact and influence that a winning team can have on a community. And it can be a community, it can be a city, it can be a state, it can be a country.
Yeah.
And in our case, like, we understand that obligation, and we also understand, like, it doesn't happen overnight. And there are, in many cases, 57 other teams in your league fighting just as hard as you are, who have just as many resources and are as smart or smarter. And so we have a very much a long-term view, much like you would if you were a private equity investor, so to speak.
You have been in that for so long, but as you already said, you still maybe get upset when the team loses, or at least it maybe has a tough loss, I guess. And it doesn't go away, right? It hurts. And that's the same with, I don't run teams, but, when the teams I support, when they lose, it still puts me down. And, but you got to get up and dust yourself off. And that's what sports was all about as well. So interesting. I want to touch a little bit on a couple of other things, which it sits within the organization. That's obviously you're in the you're having an esports team, as well as you have this sort of, what you call the innovation lab, which I'm assuming is some sort of an incubation lab for, new technology and other things. So tell me a bit about how you see, how all that is influencing the real world of sport, which is really where you started and what we've been talking about the whole time now. How do you see this new emerging space, from esports to others, influencing, the world we're in?
Sure. Well, esports, I mean, you certainly can't deny the global audience and appeal of esports. It's unmatched. And so we're an early adopter into esports. This is our third or fourth year. And we've learned quite a few lessons and taken even more lumps as we continue to kind of lead from the front. We've tripped and fallen several times. We finally have kind of landed on a really, really impressive CEO named Mike Prindiville, kind of merged with the Houston Rockets organization. It's been a good meshing. Mm-hmm. Sure. I can tell you, I went to a small school outside of Philadelphia. It's called Villanova University. It happens to be a basketball powerhouse now, but wasn't when I was there. They've won a couple national titles here in the last few years. I was at Villanova and graduated, kind of a utility knife type student. I love to learn, so I was taking crazy electives. Like, I took a couple semesters of calculus. I took a couple semesters of Japanese. So I definitely was a bit of a glutton for punishment. Loved to be in the classroom, loved to learn, fell in love with the students, was involved all around campus, and graduated without a job in 1992 and went to the beach, which is it's called the Shore here, Jersey Shore. And I was working as a bouncer in a bar. I don't know if that's the term they use in Asia, but effectively I was supposedly the muscle if there were any problems. If you know me, that's very unlikely.
Yeah.
I was rooming we'd rented a house, and a bunch of my friends, were heading to accounting firms. One was getting his PhD in chemistry. Another one was going to med school. Another one was going into sales. And I was the only one that did not have a job or an opportunity and hadn't really contemplated it or thought about it too much. But apparently my mother had. And so she was a leadership development trainer, and she had been training companies all over the world, Xerox and ADP and Texaco and McDonald's. And she called me one time at the Shore, and this is pre-cell phones. So she said, well, good news. I've got a friend of mine who I've worked with for the last 10 years. He's a sales manager for ADP, which is a check processing company. Well, anyway, I was driving back from the Jersey Shore. I was going to stay at a friend's house who was doing a 5th year at Villanova. Unfortunately, my car broke down on the way there. So I got out and hitchhiked back to his room at 2-3 in the morning. Woke up the next day and recalled that I'd forgotten my clothes in my car that had broken down. So I borrowed a suit. Unfortunately, he was a Division I athlete, substantially bigger than I was, but I borrowed his suit and his size 13 shoes. I show up at this interview, and he said, Scott, you're not ready, are you? The people that will work for me would have been at Nordstrom and figured out a way to get a suit. Like, if you're serious, give me a call. And so, yeah, it was a tough one. And so as I was driving home, the only thing I could think of was how I could avoid my mother and for how long. And so it was about 2 weeks later, I finally picked up the call, and she gave it to me pretty good. This was a big client of hers and a strong relationship. I had embarrassed her. And I made it at the Shore another week, and then I just went home. And made finding a job a full-time job. And back then, there wasn't email, so I was sending out letters, believe it or not, and in a resume. And my dad had the best advice for me. He said, you know, where do you want to work? Which sounds so simple, but I never thought about it. And you could call it luck. You know, my resume was full for a college student. It was a full resume. And I got hired as an assistant, a secretary, in a marketing group at the New Jersey Nets, which was at the time one of the kind of sad sack type organizations in sports. Could never win, could never get out of their own way.
Right.
But for me, boy, I will tell you, I fell in love with it. Fell in love. I would get there first and wait until the first person got there and let me in the door. Until 3 months in, they gave me a key. I was always the last one to leave, and I was there on weekends, and it would be the president, the general counsel, the CFO, and that kid.